Be me, 28, HR manager at a decent-sized tech company. I like to think I'm good at my job. Actually, I know I am. My performance reviews are stellar. I specialize in conflict resolution and employee wellness. Basically, I'm the person they call when people problems get too peoply. I've taken all the courses, read all the books. Emotional intelligence, nonviolent communication, creating psychological safety in the workplace. It's not just a job, it's a worldview. I run a small blog on the side. Nothing major, just a place to put my thoughts on modern social dynamics. A lot of it focuses on what I call the masculinity crisis. The core of my theory is simple. Society has traditionally taught men to suppress their emotions, and now they're paying the price. They don't know how to communicate, how to be vulnerable. This leads to what everyone calls toxic masculinity. It's not their fault, not really. It's a systemic issue. But it is their responsibility to unlearn it. My whole philosophy is built on creating safe spaces for them to do that, to open up, to verbalize, to process. I genuinely believe I'm doing good work. I see it in exit interviews, in mediations. People just need the right framework to express themselves. Life was good. My apartment is clean. My career is on track. My social life is curated and drama-free. Everything was in its right place, managed and optimized. Then my brother Daniel showed up. It was a Tuesday night, I think. Maybe a Wednesday. I was just back from a late yoga class, feeling centered. The buzzer rang. It was him. I hadn't seen him in a few months, not since the last obligatory family holiday. He was standing on my doorstep, looking like a ghost. Pale, dark circles under his eyes, clothes rumpled. He was holding a single duffel bag and a beat-up cardboard box. My first thought wasn't concern. It was annoyance, an unscheduled variable. He mumbled something about him and his girlfriend breaking up. The girlfriend. They'd been together for years, since college, lived together in a little apartment across town. He asked if he could stay for a few days, just until he figured things out. My meticulously organized life screeched to a halt. But then, a different part of my brain kicked in. The HR part. Here he was, a live case study, the perfect embodiment of everything I wrote about. A man facing emotional trauma, completely shut down, unable to articulate his pain. This wasn't a problem. This was an opportunity to help him, and maybe to validate my own theories in a real-world setting. I smiled, opened the door wider, and told him of course he could stay. He could have the guest room. I'd just cleared it out. He trudged inside, barely making eye contact, and dropped his bag by the door. The silence was immediate and heavy. He just stood there in my entryway, looking lost. I went into professional mode. Okay, Daniel, let's get you settled. I'll make some tea. We can talk about establishing a plan for the next few days. He just nodded. That first night set the tone for everything that followed. I tried to engage him, to create that safe space. I asked open-ended questions. How are you processing this change? What are your immediate feelings about the situation? All I got were shrugs and one-word answers. Tired? Fine? Don't know. It was like talking to a brick wall, a sad, tired brick wall. He eventually just excused himself and went to the guest room, closing the door behind him. I stood in my perfect, quiet living room, feeling a mix of pity and professional excitement. This was going to be a challenge, but I was equipped for it. The next morning, I laid out my strategy. Phase 1. Establish a routine and create opportunities for structured communication. I made a healthy breakfast, quinoa porridge with berries. He came out of his room looking like he hadn't slept at all. He poured himself a black coffee and ignored the food. I tried again. Daniel, I think it would be beneficial for us to have a check-in each morning, just 5 minutes, to set an intention for the day and verbalize any emotional blockages. He looked at me over the rim of his coffee mug. His eyes were completely blank. "Okay," he said. And that was it. He finished his coffee in silence and retreated back to his room. I heard his laptop boot up. He was a software developer, probably trying to lose himself in code, a classic avoidance tactic. The first week was more of the same. He was a ghost in my apartment. I'd hear him shuffling around late at night, the soft glow of his laptop screen visible under the door. He ate sporadically, usually cheap instant noodles he'd bought himself. My attempts at structured dialogue were met with polite, impenetrable silence. I wasn't getting angry yet. I was still in diagnostic mode. The subject was clearly displaying severe emotional withdrawal. The traditional male response to trauma: isolate and suppress. My blog posts practically wrote themselves. I wrote a piece titled "The Silent Man When He Can't Speak His Pain." I used a hypothetical case study that was, of course, entirely based on him. It got a lot of positive comments. I felt like I was seeing the theory in high definition. Around the second week, I decided to shift my approach. Phase 2. Passive resource provision. If he wouldn't engage in direct conversation, I would provide him with the tools to begin his own journey of introspection. I started leaving things out for him. I printed out articles from psychology websites and left them on the kitchen counter. The importance of male vulnerability. How to grieve a relationship in a healthy way. Breaking the cycle of stoicism. They would be gone in the morning, but I never knew if he read them or just threw them away. I started playing podcasts out loud while I was cooking, shows with therapists discussing modern masculinity, the emotional lives of men. I'd see him in the periphery, paused in the hallway, before he'd quickly retreat to his room. He started wearing headphones around the apartment. The atmosphere was growing tense. It wasn't a home anymore. It was my office, and he was my most difficult case. I was starting to get frustrated. I was offering him a lifeline, a curated, expert-guided path out of his misery, and he was refusing to even acknowledge it. It felt like a personal rejection of my expertise. My patience was wearing thin. I'd come home from work, where I'd spent all day successfully coaching executives on their communication styles, to find my own brother sitting in a dark room, staring at a screen, wrapped in a blanket of silent misery. It felt like a failure. My failure. And I don't handle failure well. One evening, I decided to be more direct. I knocked on his door. He opened it a crack. The room was dark except for the laptop screen. "Daniel, we need to talk. This isn't healthy. You've been here for almost 3 weeks, and you haven't said more than 10 words to me." He just looked at me. "What do you want me to say, Judith?" His voice was raspy. "I want you to talk to me. I'm your sister. I'm here to help you, but I can't help you if you won't let me in. This wall you've built, it's a classic symptom of toxic masculinity, the inability to ask for help." He almost smiled, but it was a bitter, tired thing. "I'm just tired," he said, and started to close the door. I put my hand out to stop it. "No, that's not good enough. You're using tired as a shield. I want to know what's really going on." He sighed, a deep rattling sound. "It's over. She left. I have to find a new place to live. I'm working. That's what's going on." It was the most he'd said to me in weeks, but it was just a list of facts. No emotion, no vulnerability. My frustration boiled over. "That's the what, Daniel, not the how. How are you feeling? Are you angry? Sad? Betrayed? Give me something to work with." He stared at me for a long moment. "I need to get back to work," he said, and gently closed the door in my face. I stood there in the hallway, my heart pounding with indignation. The audacity. I was offering him a free therapy session, a bespoke emotional wellness plan, and he was shutting me out. It was clear he was a more severe case than I'd imagined, deeply entrenched in those harmful, outdated masculine ideals. That night, I called my friends. I needed to vent to people who would understand. I paced around my living room, phone pressed to my ear, detailing my frustrations. "It's like he's proud of his own suffering," I told my friend from the office. "He's wrapping himself in this stoic victimhood, and he won't accept any of the tools I'm giving him." It's a fascinating case study in arrested emotional development. All the literature points to this exact pattern. The male ego is so fragile, it prefers self-destruction to admitting it needs help. I was on a roll, feeling validated by my friend's sympathetic noises. Honestly, at this point, it's not even about helping him anymore. It's about the principle. He's living proof of why my work is so important. As I was saying that, I turned and saw a shadow move in the dark hallway. The guest room door, which had been slightly ajar, clicked shut. My blood ran cold. Had he heard me? How much had he heard? I quickly ended the call, a knot of something I couldn't quite name twisting in my stomach. Guilt? No, that wasn't it. It was exposure. I felt exposed. I told myself it didn't matter. Everything I said was true from a clinical perspective, but the dynamic in the apartment shifted after that. The silence became heavier, colder. He didn't just avoid me anymore. He moved through the apartment like I didn't exist. If I was in the kitchen, he would wait until I left to get a glass of water. We were two ghosts haunting the same space, bound by blood but separated by a chasm of misunderstanding I had, in my expert opinion, accurately diagnosed. A few days later, his best friend came over, a guy I'd never liked. He was quiet, a bit rough around the edges, a mechanic or something, the kind of guy who probably thought therapy was for weaklings. I braced myself for a night of loud video games and grunting, but it wasn't like that. I was working in the living room, pretending not to listen. They didn't say much at all. His friend brought over a greasy pizza box and a 6-pack of beer. They put on some dumb action movie from the 90s. For 2 hours, they just sat there, watching the movie, eating pizza. The only conversation I heard was about the movie. Oh, that was a cool explosion. He should have just shot the guy. It was maddening. My brother was in the middle of a life-altering crisis, and they were talking about special effects. This was it. This was the toxic male bonding I wrote about, the mutual reinforcement of emotional suppression. They weren't helping each other. They were enabling each other's silence. As his friend was leaving, I heard him clap Daniel on the shoulder at the door. He said in a low voice I almost didn't catch, "Hey man, it's messed up. What she did was messed up. You didn't deserve that. Call me if you need anything. Seriously. Even if it's just to move heavy stuff." Daniel just nodded. "Yeah, thanks for coming." And that was it. I sat there on my couch, fuming. That was his idea of support? A pat on the back and a confirmation that it's messed up? No deep dive into the emotional fallout, no framework for recovery, no action plan. It was pathetic. It was a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. And yet, when Daniel came back into the living room to grab a plate, I saw something in his face I hadn't seen in a month, a flicker of, not relief exactly, but something less heavy. The tension in his shoulders seemed a little looser. It made no sense. My carefully constructed, evidence-based interventions were met with a wall of silence. This guy shows up with cheap pizza and a few grunted words of validation, and suddenly my brother looks almost human again. I didn't understand it. And what I don't understand, I resent. It only strengthened my resolve. Clearly, Daniel was surrounded by people who enabled his worst instincts. His friend, probably his dad, the whole culture he was steeped in. I wasn't just his sister. I was his only hope of breaking the cycle. The pressure was on. I had to break through, for his own good. My approach became more aggressive. The passive phase was over. It was time for a direct confrontation, an intervention. I started planning it out like a work project. I needed a catalyst, something tangible to force the issue. My eyes kept landing on the cardboard box he'd brought with him. It was still sitting in the corner of his room, untouched, a sealed sarcophagus of his past life. I knew it was an invasion of his privacy. My logical brain knew it, but my professional, problem-solving brain saw it as a diagnostic tool. What was in there? What was he holding on to so tightly? If I could understand the what, I could force him to confront the why. It was the key, I was sure of it. The opportunity came a few days later. A Saturday afternoon. He'd gone out, said he was meeting his friend to look at a possible room for rent. The apartment was empty and silent. My heart was pounding. I knew what I was about to do crossed a line, but I justified it. I was a doctor preparing for surgery. Sometimes you have to make an incision to get to the disease. I walked into his room. It was sparse, impersonal, a temporary holding cell, except for that box. It was just a standard moving box, sealed with packing tape. I took a deep breath, and I sliced the tape open with my kitchen shears. My hands were shaking a little as I folded back the flaps. It wasn't what I expected. I thought maybe I'd find angry letters, things he'd broken, evidence of rage. But it was quiet, sad. On top was a framed photo of him and his ex-girlfriend. They were on a beach, smiling. She was laughing, her head thrown back. He was looking at her with an expression of pure adoration. Beneath that, a stack of ticket stubs. Movies, concerts, train tickets from a trip they took. A goofy little clay mug he'd made for her in one of those pottery classes. A dried-out corsage. It was a museum of their relationship, all the little mundane pieces of a shared life. And looking at it, I didn't feel pity. I felt a surge of white-hot anger. This was it. This was the sickness. He wasn't grieving, he was wallowing, he was clinging to a fantasy, refusing to accept reality. This box was the anchor holding him down in his own sea of misery. He needed to be cut free. I didn't put anything back. I left the box open on his floor, the contents exposed. I went to the living room to wait for him. I rehearsed my opening lines. I'd be firm, but compassionate. I'd explain that this attachment to material objects was a symptom of his inability to process the emotional loss. I'd frame it as a breakthrough moment. He came home about an hour later. He walked in, saw me sitting on the couch, and gave me a wary look. "Hey," he said, and started to walk toward his room. "We need to talk," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. He stopped, his hand on his bedroom doorknob. He turned around slowly. "About what?" "About that," I said, nodding toward his room. "About the shrine you're keeping in there." A flicker of confusion crossed his face, then dawning horror as he realized what I meant. He pushed the door open and saw the box. Violated. Its contents spilled out like an open wound. He stood frozen in the doorway for a second, just staring. Then he turned to look at me. His face was completely white. For the first time since he'd arrived, I saw a raw, powerful emotion in his eyes. But it wasn't sadness. It was a cold, quiet rage that terrified me. I had my confrontation. I had my catalyst. And I had absolutely no idea what I had just unleashed. I had rehearsed this. I had a script. I took a breath to center myself, to reestablish my professional footing. This was an intervention, not a fight. "Daniel, I know this is difficult to see," I began, my voice calm and measured, exactly as I'd practiced. "But this attachment you have to these objects, this shrine, it's a textbook example of arrested grieving." He didn't say anything. He just watched me, his expression unreadable. His silence used to feel like a void. Now it felt like a coiled spring. I pressed on, ignoring the warning bells in my head. "You're preventing yourself from processing the trauma by clinging to these totems of a past that no longer exists. To move forward, you have to let go. I know it hurts, but this is a necessary step." My opening this box was a therapeutic catalyst. It was to force a breakthrough. I was proud of that line. Therapeutic catalyst. It sounded professional, justified. I expected him to crumble, to finally break down and cry, to admit that I was right. That's what the books said would happen. The emotional dam would break. Instead, he took a slow step out of the doorway, into the hall. He let the door swing shut behind him, closing off the sight of the violated box. He was calm, terrifyingly calm. A catalyst, he repeated, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. You think you know what's in that box. I know it represents a painful past that you're refusing to leave behind, I said, my confidence wavering slightly. Why wasn't he following the script? It's not the past I'm clinging to, Judith. It's the evidence. Evidence of what? A failed relationship. You have to accept that. He laughed. A short, sharp, ugly sound with no humor in it. It was the loudest noise he'd made since he arrived, and it echoed in the hallway. Failed? Oh, it failed. But you have no idea how. You've been so busy trying to diagnose my toxic silent masculinity, you never stopped to consider the facts. My HR training kicked in. De-escalate. Recenter the conversation. The facts are that you're in pain and your coping mechanisms are... Stop, he said. The word was quiet, but it hit me like a physical blow. It cut through all my training, all my theories. It was pure, unadulterated command. I stopped. He leaned against the wall, not looking at me, but at some fixed point in the distance. You want me to talk? He said, his voice flat and dead. Okay, let's talk. Let's talk about why I'm here. I braced myself. This was it. The breakthrough. It started about 6 months ago. She started working late. A lot. Said it was a big project at work. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? I was working 2 jobs back then, remember? My main job and freelance stuff on the weekends. I was trying to save up for a down payment on a house for us. He paused, and I could feel my pre-planned responses dying on my tongue. This wasn't about feelings. This was a narrative. I'd come home exhausted, and she'd be distant, on her phone all the time. If I tried to talk to her about it, she'd say I was being insecure, controlling. She said the stress of my extra work was making me paranoid. She was good. She was very, very good at making me feel like I was the problem. So one night, I came home early. My freelance client canceled last minute. Her car wasn't there. I figured she was still at work. I went inside, and I heard her laptop chime in the bedroom. A video call was still connected. She'd forgotten to close it. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were hollow. She was on a call with one of my colleagues, one of the guys from my office, and they weren't talking about work, Judith. They were laughing about me, about how hard I was working, how clueless I was. He was at her late-night work session. They'd been doing this for months. My throat went dry. This wasn't in any of the textbooks. The day she left, he continued, his voice never rising. I got a notification from the bank, a large withdrawal. I checked our joint savings account, the one with the down payment money. It was empty. She'd cleared it out, every penny. She left a note on the counter that said she was taking her half, and that she hoped I'd get the help I need. He pushed himself off the wall and started pacing, a slow, caged walk. But that wasn't the best part. The best part was what she did next. She knew I'd be devastated. She knew I'd be broken. So she did a preemptive strike. She called all our mutual friends, all of them, the people I'd known for 10 years. She told them that she had to leave because I was becoming emotionally abusive, that my silence was suffocating her, that I was controlling and possessive. He stopped pacing and stared right at me. Sound familiar, Judith? Sounds a lot like your blog posts, doesn't it? I couldn't breathe. My entire intellectual framework, my entire professional identity was starting to crack. She used the language, your language. the language of therapy and wellness. She weaponized it, and it worked. No one called me. Not a single person. They just picked a side, her side, the side of the articulate, emotionally intelligent woman who was brave enough to leave her toxic, silent partner. He gestured vaguely toward his room. That box, that's not a shrine to her. Do you think I want to remember her? That box is the only proof I have that any of it was real, that I wasn't crazy, that for a few years there was something good before she burned it all to the ground and salted the earth. The silence that followed was immense. My ears were ringing. All my theories, my articles, my interventions, they were all based on a false premise. I hadn't been dealing with a man who couldn't talk about his grief. I'd been dealing with a man who had been systematically dismantled by a person who used my own playbook against him. My help hadn't been help. It had been a reenactment of his trauma. I was her echo. My face must have shown the horror I was feeling, because his expression softened for a fraction of a second, replaced by a profound weariness. "And then I came here," he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "My last resort, my sister. And what did you do?" I opened my mouth to say something, to apologize, to explain, but no words came out. What could I possibly say? "You didn't see a brother who was in hell. You saw a project, a case study. You sat me down and tried to set emotional goals. You left your little articles out like clues in a scavenger hunt for my own feelings. I even heard you on the phone, talking about me like I was some specimen in a jar. A fascinating case of arrested emotional development." He quoted my own words back to me, and I physically flinched. I wasn't silent because I'm a man who can't talk, Judith. I was silent because I was watching you. I was watching you do the exact same thing she did. You didn't want to hear my story. You wanted me to fit into yours. You wanted me to perform my sadness in a way that would validate your theories. He took a step closer, and for the first time, I felt small, insignificant. You never once, not one single time since I walked through that door, you never once just looked at me and asked, "Daniel, are you hurting?" He wasn't yelling. He didn't need to. The quiet truth of his words was louder than any scream. You just kept asking, "Why won't you talk?" You weren't listening for an answer. You were listening for a confession. You wanted me to admit that I was the problem, that my masculinity was the problem. Your whole world is a nail, so you hammered me with it. And then, the final blow, the one that shattered everything. You weren't trying to help me. You were trying to be right. He stood there for a moment, letting the words hang in the air between us, letting them burrow into me. Then he turned around without another word and walked into his room, closing the door softly behind him. The click of the latch was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I stood in the hallway, frozen. My mind was a white screen. All the jargon, the theories, the confident assertions, all gone, wiped clean. He was right. He was right about every single thing. I wasn't a helper. I was a pathologist. I had seen his pain not as a wound to be tended, but as a symptom to be diagnosed and categorized. My safe space was a laboratory. My support was an interrogation. The profound, stomach-churning irony was that his ex-girlfriend had used the very language of empathy and vulnerability that I championed to destroy him. And I had picked up the same tools and used them to bludgeon him with my good intentions. I stumbled back to the living room and sank onto the couch. My perfect minimalist apartment suddenly felt like a sterile, cold prison. My blog, my career, my entire identity as a person who understands people. It all felt like a lie, a monument to my own arrogance. I thought about what his friend had said. It's messed up. What she did was messed up. It wasn't therapy. It wasn't an action plan. It was just the truth. A simple acknowledgement of his reality. It was what he needed. and his quiet, beer-drinking friend could give it to him in 5 seconds, while I, with all my education and expertise, had spent a month making everything worse. I had been so obsessed with teaching a man how to speak that I had completely forgotten how to listen. I sat on that couch for hours. The sun went down. The city lights came on. I didn't move. I felt hollowed out, destroyed, not by him, but by the reflection of myself I had seen in his eyes. The next morning, a Saturday, I heard him moving around early. I didn't get up. I couldn't face him. What would I even say? Sorry, my entire belief system turned me into a monster. Around noon, there was a knock on the front door. I heard Daniel answer it. It was his friend, Mark. I heard quiet, muffled conversation, the sound of tape being pulled across a box. He was packing. Of course he was. An hour later, I heard footsteps in the hall. Daniel appeared in the living room doorway. He had his duffel bag over his shoulder. He looked at me, sitting on the couch in the same clothes as yesterday. There was no anger in his eyes anymore, just a vast, quiet sadness. "I'm leaving," he said. It wasn't an announcement. It was a statement of fact. I finally found my voice. It was a pathetic croak. "Daniel, Don't," he said, holding up a hand. It wasn't unkind, just final. Just, don't. And then he was gone. I heard the front door close. I heard his friend's truck start up and drive away. The apartment was silent again. But it wasn't the clean, orderly silence I was used to. It was a screaming, empty silence, filled with the ghosts of all the words I should have said and all the words I should have listened to. I sat there, alone in my perfect apartment, with my successful career and my validated theories. I had won. My project had finally verbalized his trauma, and I had lost everything. My name is Judith. I'm an expert in communication. And I destroyed my own brother because I never once thought to just ask him a simple question.